When we picture Christ the Redeemer watching over Rio de Janeiro, we almost always see this serene, entirely still silhouette, right? It just looks like it belongs there. But as we're going to see today, as we dive into the source material, from a purely structural nuts and bolts standpoint, this immense colossus really shouldn't be able to stand at all.
Think about it for a second. What do you actually picture when you think about how this monument was put together? What's hiding inside the world's most famous statue? Most of us have a pretty standard idea of how giant sculptures are built, especially ones that have been sitting there for nearly 100 years.
The prevailing myth is that it's just one massive, completely solid block of carved stone. When you look up and see it perched so perfectly on the edge of that mountain, it is incredibly easy to assume somebody just chiseled it out of a gigantic piece of rock. Well, scratch that idea, because we're about to flip your perspective completely upside down. The reality of this monument actually comes down to the number 12. Christ the Redeemer is absolutely not a solid block of stone. Technically speaking, it is a 12-story, completely hollow building. No kidding. It's a highly complex, meticulously constructed tower anchored straight to a mountaintop, 700 meters up in the sky. It's just a totally different reality than what we get from the postcards.
To really grasp the sheer madness of this project, we have to rewind back to 1921. Brazil was looking for a grand symbol to celebrate its centenary of independence. Now, Mount Corcovado, which translates to the Hunchback, was the obvious choice for maximum visibility. But it was also easily the absolute craziest possible site to try and build on. They finally kicked off construction in 1926, and after 9 grueling years, inaugurated the whole thing in 1931.
But here is a wild detail. The monument we know today almost looked completely different. The winning engineer, Heitor da Silva Costa, had a completely different original vision. He actually designed Christ holding a massive cross in one hand and a giant globe in the other. But the public backlash was swift and, honestly, a bit brutal. People ironically nicknamed it Christ with the Ball. That sting of failure pushed Silva Costa right back to the drawing board. And his new solution was brilliant. The statue itself would become the cross. He went with this stunning, modern Art Deco aesthetic with the arms wide open. It was gorgeous. But that specific design choice immediately birthed a colossal technical nightmare. Because think about the physics here. How exactly does a massive cross withstand 200-kilometer-per-hour hurricane winds? Those beautifully outstretched arms act exactly like an immense sail, catching the wind. During a bad storm, the pressure slamming into the structure is hundreds of kilos per square meter. The crosswinds up at that altitude are absolutely punishing. So the multi-million-dollar question was, what on earth do you build this out of? Back in the 1920s, a lot of people pushed for steel framing, kind of like the Eiffel Tower. But Silva Cuesta knew that steel, when exposed to Rio's super salty ocean air, would require insane amounts of maintenance and basically rot away within decades. So he went with a really risky alternative: reinforced concrete. Back then, they called it the artificial stone of the future. It gave them the rigidity they needed, but literally no one had ever used it for a complex work of art at 700 meters in the air. To make sure this unproven concrete skeleton wouldn't just topple over, they brought in Albert Coquat, one of France's most brilliant structural engineers, and his task was, well, monumental. He had to tame 1,145 tons. That's the sheer weight of the statue. Coquat had to run all the math to guarantee the structure could handle that staggering 1,145-ton load, while also fighting off the terrifying wind pressure, actively trying to snap the statue's arms right off. Now, while all those intense structural calculations were happening, the artistic soul of the project was actually taking shape thousands of miles away in Paris. Sculptor Paul Landesky crafted full-scale plaster models of the head and the hands. Then, they sliced those models into dozens of smaller pieces, shipped them all the way across the Atlantic to Rio, and filled them with concrete on site. It literally became the largest, highest-stakes 3D puzzle in human history, because being off by a single millimeter at the base meant a massive, disastrous misalignment at the summit. Just picture trying to put that puzzle together in 1926. You are on an isolated, jagged granite spire surrounded by dense rainforest. There are absolutely no paved roads. Every single gram of sand, every drop of water, the cement, and those huge plaster molds, they all had to be hauled up a single tiny rack railway.
all while fighting completely unpredictable mountain weather that could shift from clear skies to a torrential downpour in 10 minutes. The space up there was so impossibly tight, they couldn't even store materials. Whatever came up on the train in the morning literally had to be poured by the evening. The workers were up there in total isolation, basically living inside slippery clouds. And yet, despite having absolutely zero modern safety harnesses, the casualty count for the entire project was an absolute miracle. 0. Not a single person died during the entire 9 years of construction. That alone is just a mind-blowing achievement. Okay, let's actually peel back the layers and take a look at that meticulously engineered inner skeleton we talked about. Inside this 12-story hollow building, there is a crazy web of diagonal pillars and beams. They're specifically angled to take that entire 1,145-ton load and drive it straight down into foundations bored directly into the mountain's granite. Oh, and threading through all this? A cramped internal metal staircase winding through these incredibly narrow corridors, from the feet all the way up into the arms and the head. But right in the middle of all that cold, cramped steel and concrete, there is something just genuinely beautiful. If you climb to the 4th floor, right at chest level, the structure opens up into a hidden concrete heart. Silva was such a perfectionist that he had a small anatomic heart molded on the inside and the outside, and he had it clad with the exact same care as the rest of the statue. You can't see it from the ground at all. It's a secret little signature left there purely for the engineers of the future to find. But pulling off the concrete skeleton was only half the battle, because they had a fatal flaw. Reinforced concrete is tough, sure, but it is also highly porous. Under the brutal thermal stress of the blazing Brazilian sun and tropical rain, that concrete would inevitably expand, contract, and crack. So Silva desperately needed to find some kind of cladding to protect the skeleton forever. And he found a brilliant, game-changing answer out in the quarries of Minas Gerais, steatite, which we usually call soapstone. This rock has a completely unique superpower. When you mine it, it is soft as talc, super easy to carve. But the moment you expose it to the elements, it hardens up and becomes incredibly impermeable. It was literally the perfect protective skin. But then the question became, how on earth do you cover a 30-meter-tall curved surface with solid stone? Well, you pull off a masterpiece of manual microengineering. They sliced the soapstone into 6 million tiny little triangles, just 3 centimeters wide. Then thousands of local women in Rio sat and meticulously glued them onto sheets of linen paper. And here's the best part. Many of them wrote secret wishes or names of loved ones on the back of the stones. Then, those sheets were pressed into fresh cement up on the mountain like giant strips of mineral wallpaper. So the statue isn't just gray. It's a massive mosaic that actually reflects the light differently at every hour of the day. Now, that stone skin is fantastic against rain and humidity, but what about the sky? Because when you're the absolute tallest structure on an isolated peak, you are a literal lightning rod. During the rainy season, Corcovado is ground zero for violently extreme electrical storms. So what happens when this monument takes a direct hit from tropical lightning? Why doesn't the concrete just explode on impact? Well, the answer is hidden right inside. The engineers essentially turned the whole thing into a massive hidden Faraday cage. Remember that deep internal steel armor we talked about? It is completely integrated with lightning rods that are secretly embedded in the crown of the head and the fingertips. So when lightning strikes, the system catches that raw electricity, safely channels it straight down through the internal metal skeleton, and discharges it deep into the mountain's granite. The concrete never feels a thing. But hey, nature is incredibly fierce, and even perfect engineering has its limits, right? Look at the year 2014. The structure itself obviously didn't explode, but the sheer, raw power of a tropical lightning strike can actually be hot enough to literally vaporize the stone on the outside. And that's exactly what happened in 2014, when a particularly devastating strike completely obliterated the statue's right thumb. And let me tell you, fixing damage up there requires some truly spine-chilling repairs suspended right above the void. To fix it, specialized workers, who are actually highly trained professional climbers, have to abseil down from a hatch in the top of the statue's head. They literally walk out along the top of those outstretched arms, staring straight down a terrifying 700-meter drop to reconstruct the missing pieces. And they use soapstone from the exact same 1930s quarry, which was preserved specifically just for these restorations. When they finally flipped the switch and turned the lights on for the very first time on October 12, 1931, the world didn't just see a beautiful sculpture, and they didn't just see a massive engineering flex. They saw the absolute perfect synthesis of both. Thanks to the incredibly clean Art Deco lines and the absolute pinpoint precision of the stonework, they somehow made a 1,000-ton colossus look as light as a feather. It's just an unbelievable triumph over wind, extreme altitude, and time. There's this fantastic quote from our source material today that just hits the nail on the head. Engineering is not just numbers, it's the courage to dream vertically. Christ the Redeemer isn't just a monument. It is the living result of 9 years of insanely complex calculations, millions of hand-glued stones, and this wild visionary dream that managed to transform a completely inaccessible peak into an eternal global icon. So the next time you see a postcard or a video of this majestic statue, I want you to remember that 12-story hollow concrete heart beating right under that delicate stone skin. Because honestly, it really makes you wonder, what other supposedly static monuments around the world are secretly hiding perfectly engineered, gravity-defying machines inside?